Good evening, everybody. Can you all hear me okay? It is lovely to see some old friends here. Please excuse me, I'm sweating really badly. A lot of layers. And I'm wondering how many of you are here for the first time? Do we have any newcomers? It is lovely to see you all. Welcome, welcome. My name is Kim Kōgen Daihō, and I was invited to give the talk this evening by our beloved Tanto Genkyoho Tim Wicks. Thank you so much. And this evening I am going to talk about human being. What is it to human be? And how the very difficulties of our lives are the key to our liberation. What is Zen practice, and what is it to study the way, as I've been doing for a while now? We might start with a fundamental quote from Dogen. Dogen is a wonderful teacher from the 13th century. He was born in the 1200s in Japan, and he's actually the founder of this particular school of Zen. And he says to study the Buddha way is to study the self, and to study the self is to forget the self. To forget the self is to be actualized by myriad things. So to forget the self is to be actualized by myriad things. When actualized by myriad things, the body and mind of the self falls away, and the bodies and minds of others fall away. No trace of enlightenment remains, and this no trace continues endlessly. Suzuki Roshi gave us a different entry point when considering the Zen way. He said, sharing the feeling that we have right here and right now is the fundamental thing for Zen practice. Really, what else is there? He didn't say that part, I said that part. But sharing that feeling that we have right here, right now, together in this very moment, in this very expression of time, is the essence of Zen practice. But for me, Zen practice is about making space for the world with its incessant change that is none other than me. And it was my own struggle and pain through doing all of that that was my greatest teacher. So I started my young life with a lot of anxiety. It was born of a difficult childhood, characterized by extremely challenging interpersonal dynamics. And I imagine I'm not alone in that. I think a lot of people have that sort of thing. I really didn't have the tools to navigate all of the internal struggles that came up as a result of where I found myself in my young life. And suffice to say that at the age of 17, I'd left home, and at the age of 21, I had left the country and found myself in London and married. I forgot to put my timer on. I was pretty much in London as a 21-year-old, without any friends, without any family, without any cultural referencing, carrying a lot of trauma, completely and entirely unaddressed, didn't even know I had it, and was white-knuckling it through new relationships. And it didn't seem rough at the time, because these things, often we look back at them and we can recognize them with clearer eyes for what they were. At the time, all I knew was that I felt I needed to calm down a little bit. And so I started taking deep breaths, and I realized that taking these deep breaths would calm me down. And I remember even commenting to my husband at the time, like, oh, I've come from Johannesburg to London. I wonder if coming from 5,000 feet up to like ground level in London is making me react differently to oxygen or something, and I'm feeling like I need to take deep breaths. Little did I know that I was setting myself up for a not well-known psychological disorder called chronic hyperventilation syndrome, or breathing pattern disorder. Because it was true that these deep, big breaths were calming me down, but I was doing them so much that I developed a kind of a disorder around it. I didn't really realize that until I was just perpetually really, really anxious, and breathing deeply no longer helped me. In fact, it made me more anxious, and I couldn't not breathe deeply because that I was anxious. So I was just really struggling. It was a few years before this actually that I had begun to take up Zen practice. And I was lucky that even in the early days when I attended to my spiritual search, I landed on Zen when I was 18, and I was lucky enough always to be practicing Zen, a lot of the time sitting by myself in a room facing a wall, didn't always have a community like I'm lucky enough to have now. And I was trying to find out what Zen had to say about breathing. And I went to Dogen, and I was like, okay, what does Dogen have to say? It turns out that Dogen doesn't have an awful lot to say about breathing. Apparently, this is intentional because Dogen didn't want us to infuse it, what he had to say, with all sorts of, he didn't want us to create all sorts of ideas around what the breath was supposed to be like. He says at one point, let a long breath be a long breath, and let a short breath be a short breath. So pretty much just let breathing do what it does. Well, that was very tricky for me. I would sit in Zazen, and if I let the breath do what it just did, I just felt a terrible anxiety. And so, what do you do when the very thing you're working with is creating you anxiety? When you are sitting down in Zazen, in meditation with your own mind, and it's your own mind that is giving you trouble. And you're like, well, I could just let my mind be what it is. But it's giving me trouble when I just let it be what it is. So this is the nature of our life. It can be very tricky, and I began to investigate this in earnest. I'm sorry to say that it lasted for many years, this struggle. Many years of me sitting Zazen and investigating what was going on with my mind and with my breath. And what I noticed I was doing is I was coming up, as one does, with ways of figuring out, like, how can I not be anxious? How can I get rid of this anxiety? This is what we're sitting with, right? So I sat and I was like, okay, well, I can, instead of concentrating on my breath, which is clearly not helping me here, I can concentrate on sound. So I would concentrate on sound, and I'd be like, okay, is the anxiety going? Is it gone yet? Is that working to get rid of the anxiety? I was like, well, maybe I can breathe really slowly. Maybe that'll work as a way of getting rid of this anxiety. And I really was doing absolutely everything I could to get rid of the anxiety. And I am a strong person, I'm very clever, and I'm extremely stubborn. And that's why I struggled for so long. It was not good. I was figuring out absolutely every way that I could get rid of this anxiety. Until a practice period down at Tassajara in 2013. So a practice period is something that we do in the Zen tradition. It typically lasts about 3 months. And in fact, we have one coming up soon. When does the next one start?
October 1st.
On October the 1st. I'm not sure if people are still able to join, but I do. They are. It's a 3-month period of more intensive practice where you devote yourself to studying the way. And this one that's coming up will be hosted by Ryushin Paul Haller, he's a former abbot and wonderful senior Dharma teacher. And he, as it happens, was leading that particular practice period as well. It was down at Tassajara, which is the jewel in the crown of our 3 temples here in the Bay Area. It's out in the Big Sur wilderness. And I was lucky enough to be doing a practice period down there, completely cloistered. You're down 14 miles of a dirt track. There is nobody and nothing down there, and you are doing a practice period in silence, sitting a lot of meditation every day. And the schedule is quite rigorous, you know. Back then, we would be waking up at about 3:50, and we'd be going to sleep at about 9:30. It was quite a rigorous schedule. And I was down there I was doing the practice period, and it was time for a sesshin. And a sesshin is an intensive period within the practice period. They last for 3 or 5 or 7 days. And they're particularly rough if you are working through emotional or mental stuff. You know, you pretty much sit consistently from 3:50 in the morning until 9:30 at night. And this was a 7-day sesshin. And you're sitting still facing a wall. And I was really going through it. I was so anxious. I was hyperventilating. I was freaking out. I got to a point on day 6 where I was just weeping. I was just weeping. I was like, I can't fight this anymore. I can't figure out how to get this anxiety to stop. I can't. I don't know what to do. And I just gave up, you know. And I was like, that's it. I give up. And I felt this this kind of rush, like a dam wall breaking, with this wave of massive anxiety that came over me. I thought I was going to throw up. But like a dam breaking, it eventually eased a little bit. And I was sitting and I was kind of shaking, and day 7 passed. And then the next day, you know, day after a 7-day session, we all get a day off where you get to sleep in until 5:30 instead of 4:30. And we were all sitting outside, you know, because everyone is doing the practice period has just finished the 7-day session. And Ryushin, our teacher, came up and with his inimitable sense of humor said, "Who's ready for the next 7-day session?" And because so many Zen students are like amazing, they were all like, "Me!" And I was just like, "You keep away from me. I don't want any more 7-day sessions." And he said, "Why? What happened?" And I told him that it was just a hell realm. It was just awful. And he said to me, something would have shifted, you know. I believed him because I trust my teacher, but I wasn't entirely sure. But, you know, he was right. He was right that something had shifted. I had learned the extraordinarily valuable lesson that you cannot wrestle your mind into submission. You can't fight it. You cannot fight your own mind, you know? The way that I had finally managed to, I don't know how to really say this, but I guess what had finally happened is instead of me constantly finding ways to push that anxiety away, I had sort of said, "Fine, come on in, do your worst. I'm not going anywhere. I've been fighting you for the best part of 20 years. Come on in. Like, whatever." You know? And the anxiety did come in. Let me know. But then because it had been welcomed in, and this fight that I was having wasn't happening anymore. All that energy was dissipated. So it kind of taught me that the difficulty, in a way, is the Dharma gate. Michel de Montaigne, I'm not entirely sure how to pronounce his name, it's French, says, "He who fears he shall suffer, suffers from what he fears." He who fears he shall suffer, suffers from what he fears. So that moment in the Zendo, which I really can remember like it was yesterday, where I felt that dam breaking, I stopped fighting. I let the moment be what it was. There was no more energy coming from me. There was no more resistance. There was no more agitation. Really, body and mind fell away. And I was actualized by myriad things. There was just the present moment. There was just the energy of the present moment. And Kim wasn't quite so dominant in the situation. Anshi Zachary Smith, one of our senior teachers, gave a talk a few weeks ago where he spoke about our practice as a devotion practice. And really it is. It's a devotion to the present moment. To completely give up everything that you hold in your mind when you're sitting zazen, to not hold so tight, to let it be what it is. This way you share a feeling with the whole world. The way we are right now when we're sitting here. Pure mind, empty mind, holy mind. And whatever you have going on in your mind when you're sitting zazen or other times, that is your Dharma gate. Now, what do I mean when I say Dharma gate? A Dharma gate is your entry point into the truth of reality. And Dharma gates come in all shapes and sizes, and we've all experienced them. An obvious example might be a stunning sunset. When you're standing, you're on the edge of a mountain or in some beautiful place and your breath is taken away by the most beautiful sunset. And body and mind falls away and there is just this moment, this truth of reality as it is. That's a Dharma gate. Dharma gates can sometimes not always be pleasant. You could get some very shocking news and you're thrown. Everything falls away, absolute silence. Just hear the beating of your own heart. That's a Dharma gate right there. Sometimes it can just be like a niggling pain between your shoulders when you're sitting zazen. You know? So, a lot of our practice is working with the difficulties of being alive and with the challenges. I've got a book here on navigating, dealing with trauma, and I was like, oh, this is so interesting because they said something here which is like perfect Zen, and I'm going to read it to you. Talking about being in the present moment. Acceptance doesn't mean you approve. It doesn't mean you're happy about something. It doesn't mean you won't work to change the situation or your response to it. But it does mean that you acknowledge reality as it is, with all its sadness, humor, irony, and gifts at a particular point in time. I've heard meditation described as choosing to pay attention to the present moment without judgment. And that's a very helpful thing to do in your life. even if you're not sitting zazen. Joseph Campbell is a scholar who specializes in comparative religion and comparative mythology. And he talks about this when he talks about myths. He says that one of the sort of archetypes or the paradigms you see regularly is that the cave you fear to enter holds the treasure that you seek. And that was certainly true for me with the anxiety. The cave you fear to enter holds the treasure that you seek. So am I suggesting that these are ways we can learn in order to get away from our suffering? Absolutely not. This is not a way to get away from your suffering, but ways to learn to create space for it in your life. You can create a cathedral for your suffering. And what do I mean by that? Well, the spaciousness of patience is very important. Within the Zen Buddhist tradition, we speak about the 6 paramitas. These are the perfections. And one of the most important of those perfections is patience. And patience has a spaciousness to it that's temporal, so it works across time. And really, when we talk about patience, it's about staying with something, typically unpleasant. We're called to be patient when we want stuff to change and we want things to move. And I speak with experience because I tend to be quite impatient. So what is it to bring patience to something? Well, you bring a spaciousness to it. You let it be what it is. You bear witness to it without judgment in the present moment. And you can have patience with whatever is going on, letting it be simply what it is without adding anything to it, without generating any activity or any kind of resistance. So whatever's coming up, whatever difficult thing is coming up, you bring patience to it. I have learned to work with the minutiae of watching anxiety manifest in this body. So I'll sit zazen and I'll see it come up. It gets kind of born, it comes into existence, comes to the fullness of its expression. And because I can sit and be patient with it and let it just be what it is without getting involved with it and generating energy around it, it will then die. And this happens with all things. This is the nature of impermanence. There's been research done around emotions that if we just let them come up and don't engage with them, they come up. I think the research says that they last maybe 90 seconds, maybe it's 60, 90, something like that. They come up and then they just go. And this is what we get to practice and train in Zazen, is to be like, what is it to just let the world be as it is without me getting involved in it? Let's just observe. Let's see what's going on. You know? And you can do that with pain and with physical pain. I'm doing it this evening with the 53-year-old's hot flushes. You see these things come up, they come to the fullness of their very red and drippy expression, and then they pass, you know. And you realize that becoming yourself means not resisting change. Now, and even though I laugh, we need to be strict, we need to be kind, and we need to be sincere. This is the way, even when it's difficult. And often it's difficult. Now, another way to create a cathedral for your difficulty this was a lovely metaphor that the excellent Zen teacher, Zen master, and Vipassana teacher Gil Fronsdale first introduced me to. And he said, well, imagine you're in an elevator with somebody who's got really bad body odor, and you're just like, oh, and they're right there and they smell so bad. And it's really disturbing you and it's really bothering you. But then the elevator opens and you enter into a cathedral and they go and wander off to the other side of the room. They've still got that body odor. It's still there. It just doesn't bother you as much. And this is Zen mind. we can create this spaciousness with our own mind when we sit zazen. The same way you can sit and focus on something specific, literally like, get focused attention, or you can have a soft attention and let your eyes soft focus and bring in everything, where you can do that the same thing with your mental spaciousness within your mind. So you can create a cathedral of spaciousness for whatever difficulty happens to be coming up. So it could be something, like I said before, a pain between your shoulders and you feel it. And when I first started sitting, and again, I'm sorry to say, for years I did this because I'm so stubborn, I was like, okay, I'm going to sit the perfect posture, push my shoulders back, and very strong. But it was way too much energy and way too hard and not soft enough, and I ended up always getting this real pain between my shoulders. And it was necessary again to just observe it without getting involved, without keep trying to I move it and let me massage it and let's just do a bit of a stretch and all these ways of getting involved. But what was needed was just to let it be what it was, let it gently show me how it would release itself when I let it be what it was. So being in the present moment, choosing to be in the present moment without judgment. Now I do have a caveat to all of this, which is that if you have very big trauma and if you have very big suffering, it is important to practice with what is referred to as a window of tolerance. There is an exceptional book by the author David Treleaven called Trauma-Sensitive Mindfulness, and he works with people who have undergone a lot of excessive trauma. And in that situation, sitting down for 40 minutes with just your own mind can be dangerous and it can be hurtful. So it's important to work with your own window of tolerance. You can sit, again, pay attention to what's happening. And if you feel yourself either completely shutting down or getting very, very hyper, ground. You can ground by touching the floor, by opening your eyes, by standing up, but don't necessarily go and full on do a 7-day sesshin to sort of, white knuckle your way through trauma, because some traumas are very big and it's important to pay attention to that. So that's Trauma-Sensitive Mindfulness by David Treleaven, an excellent book to read anyway. So you can use Zazen mind and the spaciousness of Zazen to help process trauma. And whenever I sat Zazen, the biggest thing for me to give up was control, whether it was controlling how my posture had to be just right, whether it was controlling this nature of this breath that I felt had to be a very particular way. It was necessary for me to give up control. So what is it to do the same thing again and again and again, to let it be just what it is, to have its own life and not control it, especially when you're integral to that whole process? How do I be in the world without controlling how I'm being in the world? Whether it's sitting zazen every day or any other number of things. For me, it was my breath. I'm literally constantly breathing, otherwise I'd be dead. So how do I let the breath just be what it is? So one of the things I love about Zen practice, and particularly about priest practice, is that we have many rituals. If you are a resident here, or even if you come and just join us for a morning zazen or evening zazen, you'll notice that there are certain forms that we have. You will enter the zendo with your left foot, and you will bow, and you turn clockwise. And we've got all these particular ways of doing things, because these are things that we do again and again and again and again. And we're going to do them exactly the same way, so that you can learn to see what it is when you do something exactly the same way, how you are different each time, and how it expresses differently, and how you can just let it be what it is. And then what happens, I come up here and I make an offering of the flower petals, and it's the same thing each time. But how do I let it have its own life? How do I not control it? How do I just let it be what it is? I do this as well at home, and I imagine all of us do. We have home rituals, whether it's grinding coffee in the morning, which I'm not sure if you still do, but we have ways where every morning we will have a ritual. Maybe it's making the bed, maybe it's making our coffee, maybe it's the way we brush our teeth. For me, it's in the evening feeding the cats. I've got a particular song I sing to them every day. It's the same thing, and yet it has a whole new life, and I engage with it in a whole new way. So what is it? To just let things be what they are. If you do the same thing again and again and again, notice how every day it's different, even though it's the same thing. And you can bring this quality of ritual to things so that you can investigate your life without having to sit a 7-day sesshin. So not only in Zazen, but in everyday things, we might think about, well, I would suggest for us to get into the body. And that's kind of part of what I was talking about now with the rituals. When you're doing the same thing again and again and again, you don't actually have to get mentally involved in it. You can just let your body do it. It's like a choreographed dance. Your body knows how to do it. When you've done enough prostrations, your body knows how to do a prostration, and then one day you'll do a prostration and you're like, I know how to do this, and then you fall backwards, you know. But this is it. This is our life. This is always fresh, you know. So getting into the body is really important, and that can show us a lot as well, and it allows us to let the mind settle and to not be as involved, because the one place that the body is always is present. The body is always, the mind can go wandering here and there and everywhere. The body is always in the present moment. And so it's a really great Dharma gate. And our practice of Zazen actually is all about us sitting in the body. We get into a particular posture and we stay still, and that brings you into your body, because it's actually quite tricky and it can be quite difficult and it can be quite painful. Uh-oh. So to study the self is to forget the self, and to forget the self is to be actualized by myriad things. I remember when I was an art student many years ago, and there was this one sculptor, and he came out and his hands were like bloody. I was like, oh my goodness. And he was like, they're really painful right now. I've been doing some hard work, but they feel so alive. You know? And I was like, yeah, he's right. Our difficulties are the things that remind us that we're alive, you know? And it's a great Dharma gate, because there was nowhere else he was except in his hands that were kind of hurting at that time. So our difficulties are really, they're so helpful, whatever it might be. Now, friends will still ask me if I struggle with breath, you know, and I do. If I get very anxious or very nervous about something, I can feel myself getting anxious and I start over-breathing. But through this wonderful practice that we do, I have learned to give it the spaciousness it needs to be heard, to be held, and I create the conditions for the mind and the breath to kind of calm themselves, if you will. You just need to be with it, not control it. Just take care of it like a baby in your arms, whatever the difficulty is, you know. If we cut our finger, I can't will that wound to get better. I can't, but I can create the conditions for that wound to heal itself. I can clean it, I can put a Band-Aid on, and then that wound can heal itself. And then that's what you do. You create the conditions of spaciousness in order for difficulties to pass and realize their impermanence. So personal growth doesn't tend to happen when you're on autopilot. You do have to have a degree of attention, and often difficulty will come up. And biblically, in the Christian tradition, you actually see this pattern spoken about. It's called going into the wilderness. Nobody wants to go into the wilderness. You know, you have none of the creature comforts. They're removed from you. And every spiritual figure goes into the wilderness before they have any kind of powerful ministry. Jesus was in the wilderness, and that's always the pattern. You know, even the most fundamental Christian paradigm is that death precedes resurrection. And if we do everything in our power to try and avoid these deaths, then we actually end up avoiding the subsequent resurrection as well. We put off that new life that will come as a result of being in the wilderness. One doesn't happen without the other. So if we try and avoid the cost, we can't reap the benefit. These are mythological patterns, and almost every religion has this sort of thing. In the Buddhist tradition, there is the story of the Buddha and Mara. The Buddha sits underneath the Bodhi tree, and Mara comes and presents the Buddha with all sorts of temptation and all sorts of battles and storms and just everything, difficulties. All the difficulties I'm talking about gave Buddha hard breath, gave Buddha pain between the shoulders, gave Buddha all of the things. And Buddha created spaciousness, bore witness. They say Buddha was unmoved. Literally, physically unmoved. And this is us. We are Buddha. We're sitting under the Bodhi tree. And all of these things, the difficulties of our lives, and the joys and the attachments, they're presented to us constantly. And our job is to let them be what they are. Be with them and let them be what they are. Mara is understood as a metaphorical representation of the darker aspects of the human condition that actually prevent us from kind of a spiritual awakening. So again, the cave you fear to enter holds the treasure that you seek. In the wonderful book Becoming Yourself, which is a collection of some of Suzuki Roshi's lectures, it's very recently published and is available now in the bookstore. He says, practicing in this way is immeasurably valuable. Not just because it opens us up to a life of more ease and joy and love, but this practice of being who you are in this moment has value because the Bodhisattva precepts or the Buddhist ethical principles of compassion and ethical beneficial action flow naturally and directly from it. So when you can be with things that are difficult in yourself or in other, or even in difficult situation when someone cuts you off in the road, and you can be with that without acting on it, you're letting the world be as it is, and it's beneficial action to the world. It points to a life of true care and non-harming, and it's grounded not on an allegiance to some kind of like rigid ideology or fixed moral code, but an ongoing, authentic contact with our innately loving and connected heart. Marcus Aurelius even spoke about this in the year 121, so all those years ago, almost 2,000 years ago. He said, "Do not disturb yourself by picturing your life as a whole. Do not assemble in your mind the many and varied troubles which have come to you in the past and will come to you again in the future. But ask yourself with regard to every present difficulty, what is there in this that is unbearable and beyond endurance?" So whatever comes up, like what is there happening right now that is beyond endurance? What is there happening right now that I cannot bear witness to it? Let it be what it is. Give it its own life without controlling it or pushing it away or grasping at it. You know, and we can practice with this every day. I remember being inspired by my teacher, Ryushin. I found out that lunchtime that he had had a terrible infection in his mouth and he had been taken off to have it seen to around lunchtime. But that whole morning, he sat zazen just with the most beatific expression, just sitting perfectly. And everybody who knows him knows what a profound practitioner he is. And he must have been sitting with a lot of pain, you know. So there's always these opportunities to be in the moment, to be what's going on. And it's not so easy, you know. Even when we're just out and about doing things, the urge to pick up my phone instead of like just resting, you know, just to distract myself in some way, keep myself energized and activated, it's a strong urge. But here's the thing, right? If you can learn to be with what's unpleasant, you're free. If you no longer have to avoid the things that are difficult, if you no longer have to spend your life thinking, well, I don't want that, and that's going to be painful, and I dislike that. If you have the skills to just be with whatever is difficult and hold it in the Zen way, with Zen mind, with Zazen mind, then you are completely liberated. And that's extraordinary. And the Zen practice allows us to practice with that, to learn that when you no longer have to move away from something, then you're free. So I'm going to end with the famous story of the lotus in the muddy water. Amida Buddha here. Oh, I lied. Oh, it is. There she goes. She's in a lotus flower. And you see the lotus flower throughout Buddhist iconography. Everywhere the Buddhas are in a lotus flower. And it really is one of my favorite images, because that beautiful pink blossom that comes up only is born in mud. And it is not born in spite of being in mud, but because of it. The lotus needs that claggy, muddy ground to blossom. And that's like us. Our difficulties and the suffering and the pains and the stuff that we don't want in our lives are the very path and the gateway to our liberation. Let me see if there's anything else. So I'll just finish with Dogen's words again. To study the Buddha way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. To forget the self is to be actualized by myriad things. When actualized by myriad things, the body and mind of self, as well as the bodies and minds of others, fall away. No trace of enlightenment remains, and this no trace continues endlessly. Thank you.